Welcome to the second of two programs on the four blood red moons. And as many of you know, there are four blood red moons coming up in the years 2014 and 2015. And to explain all this, we've got a very close friend of Revelation TV and me personally with us, Pastor Derek Walker of Oxford Bible Church. Derek, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Richard.
You've been on this show quite a lot, haven't you?
Yes, I love being invited.
Well, we're going to have lots more of you. So, Derek, can you tell us about these four blood red moons and how we should be paying attention to them?
Certainly. In fact, if we can show the first picture right now, I just want to first of all make the point that the moon turning to blood is a biblical sign that God uses to herald significant events. We saw before Joel's prophecy, Joel 2:31, that the sun will be turned to darkness and the moon turned to blood before the great and awesome day of the Lord. And we saw that this actually had an initial fulfillment in the first coming of Christ, because both of those signs happened on the day of the crucifixion. We know that the sun turned to darkness, but we also know on AD 33 at Passover that it was a blood red moon. There was a lunar eclipse visible from Jerusalem. And so both signs happened. And we saw before what the meaning of that is. And the fact that the blood moon has happened already is significant, because we can interpret from what happened on the day of the cross what the meaning of blood moons is. And so we talked about the fact that the sun turning to darkness was a picture of the Son of Righteousness, Jesus, being made black with our sin. He, as it were, his light was blotted out as he cried, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And so that was pictured by the sun turning to darkness. And then when Jesus had paid the penalty for our sins, and then he was buried, and then soon after that, the moon rose above the horizon, and it was a blood red moon. Especially because it was an earthquake that day. It would have been really blood. And that blood moon represented God's people who were under the power of sin are now covered in blood, because the moon represents God's people, because we reflect God's light. We are not the light, but we are reflectors of that light. So the moon, covered in blood, represents, therefore, God's people who are redeemed, who are delivered from the hand of the enemy. Praise God. And so we take that understanding forward, and we saw also that this prophecy of Joel is also fulfilled in the second coming of Christ. This time, the way the symbolism works is slightly different. First, Revelation 6:12 says the moon will be turned to blood and the sun to darkness. Now, the moon turned to blood in just before the return of the Lord, the second coming of Christ, talks about the fact of Israel actually repenting, because Jesus can only return when Israel call on him, because he said, "You will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." So Israel will repent and receive Jesus as the Messiah. They will see him whom they've pierced. They'll see with the eyes of faith. They'll call on Jesus to come. And Jesus returns at the Battle of Armageddon. And so what will happen there in the last few days is that the moon turned to blood will show the picture of Israel under the blood. And then the lights go out. The sun will be turned to darkness. And that symbolizes the fact that the lights in the sky, however powerful they seem, they're just symbols of the light, who's Jesus. So as the lights are turned out, in that darkness is heralding the fact that the true light is about to appear. The glorious one is about to appear. And so the sun turned to darkness is a symbol, as it were, of the true light about to be manifested, to come and save his people and establish his kingdom. So that gives us an idea that the fact of a blood moon speaks of God's people redeemed from an enemy. So God does speak through blood moons. It's a biblical sign, and that's why it's interesting to me what's coming up.
Right. So we're all terribly interested in these four blood red moons which are coming up in the years 2014 and 2015. Could you please tell us the significance of these four blood red moons?
Absolutely, and let's put up a picture now that shows what is going to happen. If we could see this picture now, that shows a blood moon, Just to talk about this phenomena, this is going to happen 4 times over the next 4 years on very important dates. From ancient times, the lunar eclipse, which made the moon seem as if it's turned to blood, was described in that way. And it's a natural phenomena, and they happen on a regular basis. However, what is unusual in 2014 and 15 is the fact that there's a sequence of 4 of them in a row. Full moons, fully turned to blood, as it were, and that's known as a tetrad. 4 in a row. Full moons. And the significant thing as well is that they happen on 4 feast days. The 4 major feast days. So we're going to show the next picture now, which is perhaps the crucial picture, which shows what's going to happen next. And coming up is the 15th of April is the first one. If we could see the picture, the next picture now. The first one is on the 15th of April, that's Passover. And then there's going to be another one this year at Tabernacles. These are the major feasts. The American dates you can see there, it's actually the 15th of April, and then it's the 8th of October. And then there's a full solar eclipse at the start of the calendar year, Nisan the 1st. And then in 2015, we also have the Passover, and then at Tabernacles. So there's 4 in a row, 4 blood moons, full moons, on the feast days. Now, that's got to be significant. That's very, very rare. Happens very rarely. And it's worthy of our attention. You know, it's interesting in Genesis 1:14, when God introduced the sun and the moon, he said, let them be for signs and seasons. Lights in the heavens, signs and seasons. Now, seasons is a reference to the feasts. So that's indicating that he places the signs and the feasts together, indicating that signs are often used in connection with feasts. So here we have these blood moon signs, biblical signs, all lined up with the Jewish feasts over the next 2 years. So that is interesting, to say the least. And so this is a hint, you might say. Why does God use signs? It's so that we get ready. And I believe there could be a major events taking place in connection with Israel, I believe, in particular, God's people Israel, where Israel is going to come under attack, but God will intervene. There will be a redemption, because the meaning of the blood moon is the fact it talks about redemption of God's people.
Sure.
So what I think may well happen is a major attack on Israel, but God will intervene and save Israel under that attack.
Right. So from what you're saying, Derek, it sounds as if these 4 blood red moons together is very rare. Is that right?
That's correct.
So could you very kindly tell us when have these 4 blood red moons happened together previously in history?
Right. And in fact, 3 times recently this has happened, and they were all major turning points for Israel. So it's like 1 might be a coincidence, but 2, 3, and you know, in each case, Israel was in great danger, and yet God, under attack, you might say, but yet God came through and intervened to save her. So if we look at the one that was the most recent, by the way, there are 2 in this last 100 years, and you might think, well, they're quite common. But before that, then, you have to go back another 500 years before this happened before then. So they are rare. The last one was actually in 1967 and 1968. And of course, this was a very significant date for Israel. The 6-day war took place in June of 1967. And what was happening there, Israel's neighbors were getting ready to destroy Israel, essentially. And Israel, seeing this, they launched a preemptive attack against, there was Egypt, Jordan, Syria, all about to close in. And after just 6 days of fighting, Israel had this amazing victory on every front, and that's where she got hold of the Sinai Peninsula, the Golan Heights, what's known as the West Bank. And most importantly, perhaps biblically, this is when Israel recaptured Jerusalem. Because it was in Jordanian hands. You know, the original Jerusalem of Jesus' day was in Jordanian hands. And this was a major fulfillment of prophecy, because Jesus said in Luke 21:24, he said that Israel will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive to all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And so, as a discipline on Israel, she was under Gentile dominion, and in particular Jerusalem. But that would only last, Jesus said, until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And in 1967 was the ending of the times of the Gentiles. The Gentiles have no longer the right to trample over Jerusalem. So this was a major end-time event where I believe, you know, Israel was under great threat, but yet God did miraculously. She was able to defeat all those attacking armies. And as a result, she was liberated, as it were, from that danger. And God signified that by having this tetrad in 1967, Passover Tabernacles 1968 as well. God was saying in the sky, I am Israel's Redeemer. I have set them free from the power of the enemy. So that certainly was a major event. None can deny it.
Right. So I know you said these are incredibly rare, but can I ask you, when was the one before 1967?
Well, if we go back to the one previous than that, again, it was a major event for Israel, and it was actually just after Israel was reborn as a nation. Israel was reborn in 1948, as you know, out of the ashes of the Holocaust and the Second World War. And for 1900 years, Israel had been scattered, and now Israel becomes a nation again in May the 14th, 1948. And immediately, of course, all the surrounding Arab nations wanted to destroy her, and they wouldn't agree to parcel up the land. And this is where there was a war immediately, as soon as they announced their independence. And that war went on into 1949. And again, against all odds, Israel won that war. And in 1949 and 1950, there was a tetrad. As if God was saying, now that they're back in the land, the next feast days in the land, as they've completed the war, and in the next first year in the land, as it were, now Passover, Tabernacles, Passover Tabernacles. There's the tetrad, as if God is saying, you are back in the land, and it's by my hand. You have been saved from the power of the enemies in 1948, 1949, and so the tetrad starts in 49. God is saying, I have redeemed you from the power of the enemy. It wasn't by your might or power. It's by my hand that you've been delivered. And so what an amazing, it was the first feast days after Israel was back in the land and after she was liberated from the power of the enemy. So these are the key dates of Israel's history, 1948, 1967.
Sure.
We basically have tetrads associated with those events. So that's very interesting, I think.
Very interesting. Now, Derek, I think you said earlier that we've got to go back a very long time before there's another.
That's right.
Another one.
And this is interesting too. The previous tetrad before that was in 1493. So you've got to go back 500 years.
500 years. Yes,
so that shows how rare they are. And that the year 1493, well, actually, the year before that, again, was a major. Now, you might even know it from your history, because 1492 was when Christopher Columbus actually sailed and discovered America.
Remember that.
But more was going on in 1492. In fact, that's a major event in Israel's history, because that year had seen many developments. Well, the Christians, as it were defeated the last Muslim army. That, you know, at one point it seemed like the Muslims would take over Europe and Spain and everything. But they were defeated in Spain in 1492. But also, what happened is that this is when the Spanish Inquisition was taking place. And the Jews in Spain at this point was the major home for the Jews. the Shepherdim, you know. And this was 200,000 Jews in Spain. And they were persecuted. They were forced to convert to Catholicism. Some were suspected of only pretending to convert, not really. And so there was a whole Inquisition, and things got really bad. And in 1492, the Emperor of Spain actually expelled all Jews out of Spain. And you know, the very same day that Columbus went on his journey was the very same day that of the expulsion of the Jews, which is fascinating. Now, what is going on there? This is their major base. In fact, perhaps we could show a picture of Christopher Columbus, because he is a very interesting character.
I think we already have, actually.
Oh, forgive me.
There he is again.
There we are. Because there's some very strong evidence that Christopher Columbus was a secret Jew.
Oh, right.
And actually, his expedition was not financed by the royalty. It was financed by some Jewish financiers. Right. And anyway, without going into that, it's quite interesting that in Columbus's diaries, he says this: in the same month in which their majesties issued the edict that all Jews should be driven out of the kingdom and its territories, in the same month they gave me the order to undertake with sufficient men my expedition of discovery. So it's interesting that he went the very same day as the Jews were cast out, and he probably was one himself. Now, he was a believer. I believe he was a Christian. But he was also a Jew. Right. But he kept that secret. Now, what is going on here? Immediately after that, there is a tetrad. Because something of great significance is happening. And the reason why the Jewish financiers helped him is that they knew that their homeland that they had relied on for hundreds of years in Spain was about to go. All their property would be seized. But God made provision by providing America. And America became the major safe place for the Jewish people. So at the same moment that the Jews were under great attack, as it were, their main stronghold was being destroyed, they're being cast out, they didn't know where to go, God was already at that same time providing a new place for them to be, a safe place where they would grow strong, and that would become a major thing for the future. And so here again we see the same principle of the blood moon representing God's redemption for his people covered in blood. The moon covered in blood represents God in a time when his people are under attack, under persecution, under threat of total destruction. God intervenes. Right. And so God paints the billboard in the sky saying, it's by my hand. I've redeemed you. Right. In your time of greatest danger, I have made a way for you. Right. And I've given you a land that's far better. Right. And so I think that's very significant that even 500 years ago, this was a turning point, not just of world history, but of Jewish history. Because what happens to the Jews, what happens to Israel affects the whole world, of course. Right. But I believe America was discovered, number one, for the Jewish people. Right. And number two, for the propagation of the gospel. Right. Because Christopher Columbus himself said his name means Christ bearer. Right. Christopher. And his mandate was to bring the gospel, the light of God, further afield. And so that was wonderful.
Fascinating stuff. Now I'm going to have to move on quickly because I believe there was another sequence of 4 blood red moons around about the time of the crucifixion. Is that right or not right?
That's right. If we could see the next picture, it's actually in AD 32 and 33, at the time of the cross, there was another tetrad on the Passover of 32, Tabernacles, Passover, Tabernacles, which is amazing again, isn't it? So again, of course, we already talked about the blood red moon at the crucifixion, and that was one of them, but it was part of a tetrad of blood red moons. Again, showing, speaking of God's redemption, God uses his billboard in the sky to declare what's going on earth. He's helping us understand the events that are taking place on earth are not accidents of history. They're God's interventions. Right. And so the fact that we've got a tetrad coming up this year and next year, I believe is significant, that there's going to be a great danger for Israel, but God is going to intervene.
Right, Derek. This is absolutely fascinating stuff. Now, we've just got 5 minutes left. Can you tell us what you think is relevant to the coming 4 blood red moons in 2014 and 15?
Again, I can only make speculation.
Sure.
Some relate it to the rapture, but I don't.
Right.
Myself, I believe the rapture is a signless event. It could happen any time. It's imminent. I believe could be connected with Ezekiel 38,
Right.
which is the invasion from the far north, a Russian-led invasion of Israel. And it's interesting, the recent events in the Ukraine,
Sure.
Crimea,
Yeah.
may well be relevant here. Because what's happened recently is Israel's discovered a lot of oil and gas. And in fact, I've written a book, if I can show the next picture, I've written a book called The Imminent Invasion of Israel. And this book talks about this invasion. I called it The Imminent Invasion because it could happen any time, I believe. I believe it will probably be before the rapture. And it describes, out of greed, Russia and other nations who want to destroy Israel, like Iran, Turkey, and so on, come down, and there's this massive invasion of Israel.
Right.
And it looks like Israel has had it.
Right.
You know, they're just overwhelmed. And it's possible, you see, that the leader of this invasion, who's called Gog, you know, Putin, I don't
Could
know,
be,
you know. And so if Putin is emboldened by this latest move, it may help set the stage. What I think might happen, for example, is, let's say Israel feels they have to attack Iran and take out their nuclear abilities.
Yes.
That will be perhaps the catalyst for Russia, Iran, and others to say, right, we're going to solve the Israel problem once and for all.
Interesting.
And at the same time, they have this hidden motive to take control of the energy market
Right.
that Israel would control. And so that could be the scene. And of course, God. So there's Israel under attack, but also the prophecy says God's going to intervene. God's going to move in judgment. It's going to be one of the greatest divine interventions ever recorded in the Bible. Much bigger than Sodom and Gomorrah. God's going to move in. He says in the prophecy, this is my land, this is my people. And God moves in judgment. And those invading armies are destroyed completely. And it says that revival will go around the world, because it says that I will be known in the eyes of many nations. They will know that I'm the Lord. They'll know I'm the God of the Bible, the God of Israel.
Sure.
And this will be a great opportunity to preach the gospel.
Amazing.
Because this will shake the world. And so perhaps it's this invasion, which is clearly, which hasn't been fulfilled yet. It's a very clear prophecy that must be fulfilled in the end times. And I believe it could herald an end time revival. And so, you know, I think that's what I'm looking for. That's what I think might happen.
Well, I think this is all terribly exciting. It's just possible that, like me, viewers have got some questions about this. If you've got any questions or any comments about this program, please write to info@revelationtv.com. Any questions for Derek, I will, of course, forward your emails to Derek, and I'm sure he'll be kind enough to reply. Now, Derek, I believe you've got some more information about the books and where people can obtain the books.
If we can show the next 2 pictures in fairly quick succession. I've got 2 books that people might be interested in. One's Daniel 70 Weeks, and it talks about the signs at the crucifixion, that when the moon turned to blood and the sun to darkness at the crucifixion. It's all documented here. And then my other book on the imminent invasion of Israel, this book talks about this Ezekiel invasion, and this might well be what happens in shortly. And I believe it's important we know about this, because we need to be ready when it happens. We can point to our neighbor and say, look, the Bible prophesied this would happen. Now you can see it happening in the news. You know, and what a great opportunity to share the gospel, to preach the gospel.
Right.
And so if we need to understand this prophecy and be ready, because we're going to have a wonderful opening. For a short time, there'll be an opening to preach the gospel like never before.
Well, I think this is absolutely fantastic stuff. I wasn't aware of the importance of the 4 blood red moons. I am building a new website. It will be out very soon, and all of Derek's teaching will be on the new website. It's not up yet, but I'll tell you the details when it is up. All of Derek's teaching will be on there. If you're enjoying these programs, we'd love to hear from you. If you've got any comments or questions of Derek, please write to info@revelationtv.com. Thanks for joining us. It's lovely to have you on To The Point. We think you're great. We're here to help you. Please join us again on To The Point, and God bless you.